Hello, I'm FerrousPilot, and today I'm interviewing Keith Lee, someone with years of experience making a variety of different games. To name a few, he was the lead producer for Diablo III at Blizzard Entertainment and lead game programmer for the Ratchet and Clank series at Insomniac Games. But his latest project is Duelyst, a tactical turn-based game with an emphasis on competitive play. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now I'm just going to jump right in, and you have a lot of experience, so I wanted to ask. You've worked on some pretty high-profile games, probably with lots and lots of people involved in the past. How is it like working with a smaller team compared to what you were doing earlier?
So, working at Blizzard, of course, it was the most amazing experience, and it was like manna falling from the sky, especially because I had basically spent endless hours working on playing Diablo 2 back in college. And so, everything from collecting SOJs on eBay and trading them to doing Mephisto runs. I mean, that's what we did. And so having the opportunity to build and work with a huge but phenomenally talented team is incredible. So I think that the contrast is as you get larger, you do have more and more features to work on, more and more money and a higher budget to be able to perfect everything. And I think the expectations are very high for companies like Blizzard and the AAA companies. And the expectation is to have a really perfect game when it comes out. So I think what we want to do was the opposite, to have a small team, less than 5 people. And the nice thing is on a day-to-day side for a game developer, it's nice because you can get involved in the design, you can work on programming, and you're not necessarily siloed into a particular role. So that's one of the things that I really liked on a day-to-day basis. And what happens too is that when you become really, really small, you have to have you start to build a game on very limited resources. That's where a lot of the creativity can actually emerge. Because I'll give you a great example. With Counter-Strike, the original guys who made it, they had very, very little money, very little resources. They wanted to make a massive Call of Duty game with single player and all these other things, and they could only really have enough time to build a very, very small, tight set of maps and kind of build out the weapons for Counter-Strike. As a result, it totally blew up because they just didn't worry about all these other things to match parity with other games in that category. So I think similar to us, we want to have very extreme constraints because it'll force ourselves to prioritize mercilessly and be creative every day. I think that's part of the challenge and fun of being indie. And there's no more worry about having to do a big publisher deal or a big investing deal because distribution now is much better on Steam and it's more freely distributable. So there's a lot of opportunity for creativity to kind of emerge now in these small pockets of veteran developers.
Yeah, definitely. And since we're here talking about Duelyst, of course, could you give us a general overview of the basic gameplay for people who haven't heard of it?
Yeah, so Duelist is a tactical turn-based strategy game with a heavy focus on ranked competitive play. So it's brought to you from guys that had worked on Diablo III, Rogue Legacy, and the Ratchet and Clank series. And so the focus of this game is squad-based tactical combat on a tactical map. And the idea is to have fast-paced multiplayer 1v1 battles where victory comes from defeating your opponent's general. And we love the idea of squad-based tactics. You know, we kind of grew up on XCOM and Fire Emblem and Final Fantasy Tactics, and we wanted to combine those games, those traditional games, with multiplayer and kind of bringing it to the modernity of League of Legends and Hearthstone and all these really, really great matchmaking that's there. So I really wanted to build something like that because I play a lot of squad-based tactics games, but they're all single player. I play through the campaign and then I'm done with it. I want to actually invest my time to learn about all the units and play against real people and really play some strong, interesting tactical games each time. So at launch, which will be end of this year, there will be 5 unique factions with a roster of 100 plus battle units and battle spells.
Right, so you're really focusing on the multiplayer here, so there's not going to be much in the way of single-player campaign?
Yeah, it's going to be pretty minimal. So we really want to focus on putting all of our resources to have great matchmaking, tournaments, ranking systems, leagues, and things like that. That said, we do have a single player mode where you can practice against the computer AI, and it helps you to unlock different spells and units. Very similar to Plants vs. Zombie or Hero Academy and things like that, where we still have single player, but it's really more for players to understand the game and train, and so that they can slowly introduce new units and spells to them so that they can go into the multiplayer mode.
All right, and I saw on your Kickstarter, one of the bullet points you had was not another generic fantasy. Could you tell us a little bit about the world of Duelyst?
Yeah, so when we were building out this world, we wanted to have the capacity to continue to grow this IP, this world, and having been gamers for so long, we're really tired of the standard fantasy tropes of Tolkien, high elves, and things like that. But we love fantasy, of course, but we're just used to a certain look and feel. So what we wanted to do was, you'll notice that the story is really different, the environments are different, the colors are very different, and we wanted to also have melee weapons. So that's a staple of fantasy, but we wanted to avoid using guns, but we didn't want to do steampunk either. And so there's elements of technology, and that's kind of where the story is getting driven. It's actually set in the future, far future. And so there's a little bit of sci-fi elements, and we wanted to create a world that felt unique. Like, hey, this world's really interesting. The characters are really interesting. Why do they have these factions? And that's kind of like how we wanted to build it.
And how do you make it so that players really can experience and get invested in the world when you don't have a huge story-based campaign?
Well, I think that it comes down to, again, resources, and we would love to build out the world. We've written a lot of the lore already. It's really more about time and presentation. And one of the traps is trying to build a really large single player campaign as a small company, because building single player content is pretty much infinite. You could spend years and years and years to build it, and we wanted to really focus on the other stuff. Now, that said, I'll give you a great example. Hearthstone doesn't have single player. They might have an adventure mode, but it's continued to be very successful. League of Legends doesn't have a hardcore single player campaign, but they do really well. So I think that's really kind of where we want to position ourselves, and we can continue to flesh out the world as our game continues to be successful.
Definitely, and I suppose you can use like the units and the spells to also help flesh out the world.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's actually really well thought out. We've thought about why the names of the units and why they're there. So they're not arbitrary in any way, but we just don't want to spend too much on exposition to try to explain the world yet, and we want to slowly reveal it. I think that's really the kind of the best approach for people to find it interesting and to start to dig into the world more.
All right, and considering your previous experience, you were focused more on action-oriented style of game. Why go for something slower, like some would say slower, tactical turn-based type of game?
It's a function of two different things. I think that I've personally always liked turn-based strategy games, and we like to be contrarian in terms of our approach. And I just didn't think it was an underserved market. I love tabletop. I love to play competitive games, and those two never really connected. And so that was a personal passion of mine to really kind of pursue this opportunity that way. Secondly, we could have done real time. We could have done that, and I've worked on those in the past, and we may actually do that for another title. So I think that we just wanted to do something different this time.
Right, and you mentioned tabletop in your Kickstarter. You keep mentioning tabletop, and I have to ask, how helpful has it been in designing the computer version to first, try it out on tabletop?
I would say that it was massive in terms of how much it helped us. Because if you're trying to design and also program, it becomes very hard, because if you decide to change your design, a lot of the things that you program might not be useful, or they're building out more code in your code base. Mm-hmm. So our approach was, hey, let's build out a really cool tabletop game, really if I could go and actually then play it with other people because everything's functioning already with the design, with the cards, with the units. And if I start to see issues, I could change it in real time based on the games that I'm playing with people. And then once I have a good sense of how the game really works and people are enjoying it, then it's a lot easier to program because I know the constraints of our game already.
And would you say it's like it helps mitigate risks associated with the final computer game?
A tremendous amount of risk. It reduces the risk. It reduces trying to think back and forth whether you should change the design because you're no longer constrained by saying, oh, maybe I should experiment with design B, but then that means it'll take 2 weeks to program that. While in contrast, on the tabletop, you can just say, hey, let's just try B and throw it out to a couple people, and then you'll know right away if it works or not, versus trying to spend weeks implementing a particular feature, when you're programming and stuff. So it's a really huge help.
Right. And on your Kickstarter, you mentioned something about terrain bonuses. You haven't implemented that yet, but what kind of bonuses can we expect?
So the terrain bonuses will offer permanent and as well as temporary buffs for the units that are going to occupy that tile. In some cases, if any unit lands on that tile, they may get better defense, they might have better attack, they might increase their movement speed. But one of the most important ones is that there's this notion of basically a mana spring. So essentially, your player can have more AP to be able to do more moves if one of your allies are standing on that tile. So it allows for a lot of strategy from a positioning standpoint. So you're not just attacking the opponent's general, but you know that you're going to be able to afford more AP and more moves by also having one of your units flank out to potentially grab a tile.
And looking at some of the descriptions of Duelyst, it kind of reminds me a lot of a card game, sort of like Hearthstone. Would you say you were inspired by those?
Yeah, we play a ton of CCGs, everything from Card Hunter to Hearthstone, and we even if you look at a game like Hero Academy, in some ways it is almost like a CCG as well. So we love the elements of randomness, of being able to have a different set of units in terms of your opening move and strategies. And that's what we love about CCGs and also the ability to be able to customize your squad. So from that standpoint, it works like a CCG. But the difference, of course, the really big difference is that it's a tactics game. And so your units aren't cards. They're placed actually on a tactical map. You get to move and attack with them. And you have to think about spatial positioning. And that's one of the things that aren't in most CCGs, where you just throw the card down and there's like a kind of a playboard.
Yeah, so I guess in that way it's more like a tactical turn-based game in the vein of XCOM or Fire Emblem.
Exactly. So you have to know where to position your units ultimately.
So, well, it's a turn-based game, but is it completely sequential, or do you have things like interruptions, extra moves, or bonus turns?
There's no bonus turns. There are some counter mechanics which are specified by particular battle units, and some of them can be imbued by battle spells to have counter mechanics. But basically, generally the turn sequence would occur where you have 90 seconds to make all of your moves until you run out of AP. And if you're done with your mana AP, then you're pretty much done. And so the mana that's used, or the cores that we have, it's deploying your units, it's casting your spells, it's moving and attacking your units that are already on the tactical map. And so that's how the turn sequence happens. And basically, you have 90 seconds to make a decision on what to do.
All right. And could you tell us some of the interesting units and spells? Just explain them to us.
Yeah, sure. So we have, every faction actually has 7 particular classes that are all shared by all the factions. So you have an assassin, a guardian, which is tankier. You have an assassin, which is much more of a strong melee unit. So one example, the Songhai Empire assassin has a ability called Transcendence, and it's a unique ability where they're able to get an extra turn if they're able to kill an enemy on the same turn. So you could do a lot of chaining. And so these assassins will have higher DPS, higher damage, lower armor, above average movement speed. And we wanted to thematically create this glass cannon sort of prototype for an assassin. So those are shared. But in contrast, though, the assassin for the Leonard Kingdom, which is a different faction, although they're assassins, they have a different ability. So this one has Twin Strike, and that ability allows them to simultaneously hit 2 targets within attack range. So you have to kind of really understand all the units, how they all work. And although an assassin is very clear that they do damage and they're melee, every faction will have kind of their own unique abilities.
So is that really just how you're trying to differentiate the factions through the unique abilities of each class?
Yes. So we want to differentiate on that front, and then also we want to create a very interesting rock, papers dynamic. And of course, we made sure that every unit only has one ability. So we want to avoid a unit having 4 or 5 different abilities, and now you have to open up a menu, a sub-menu, to kind of figure out what you want to do with that unit. I think that introduces way too much UI and complexity to our game. So that's kind of how we built it out and what makes us unique.
And since, of course, Duelyst is meant to be a really competitive sort of game, I have to ask, free-to-play microtransaction business model is really popular, and you've made it very clear that you will not be using that at all. Why?
Well, I think that it was for a lot of reasons. I think for us, we want to be able to have a game where you can just buy the game and you can go home and go play it with your friends, and that's what we've been used to. I think that we're targeting the Kickstarter Steam market where people are more comfortable with that model as well. And there have been a lot of games that have been very successful that way. And so we're not there to optimize on revenue per se. You know, we're there to make a great game for people to want to play. That's why we decided to make this game, is because we love tactics and we wanted to have a game out there which doesn't exist today that has ranked competitive play. Now, we could do a free-to-play approach, but I think, you know, for me, I don't like doing that. I'm not sure if you do. So I think that I think it's also just by developer preference.
Mm-hmm. So would you say also it's to help balance it in terms of, because some free-to-play games, we know they're like pay to win, and you want to avoid Duelyst being like that?
Well, I think that like you know, you look at games like Hearthstone, I don't think anyone would say that it's pay to win, even though it's free to play. So those two are very distinct. Those aren't people link them together, but they're not necessarily correlated at all. So I think to answer your question, you never have to make something pay to win if you don't want to. If you want to just be able to unlock items in a different approach, and they could work for free to play or paid games.
Mm-hmm. And you know, you have all these different factions, and how do you make sure that you have all these paths that are all competitively viable?
That's why we need to have very, very long extended beta tests, and we work with some fantastic friends who are in the gaming industry that have built and designed everything from board games to tabletop to having designed a lot of competitive games. So we run it through the gauntlet with these guys first, and then eventually we then track and we kind of look at different statistics for each of the units and how it's played and what the win-loss ratios are for us to balance it. And we just have a lot of eyes on all the units. And you're right, we have 100+ units, and we want to make sure that they're all really well balanced. And there's really no way for us to predict how people are going to play until we throw it out there. And so we just have to run through as many sessions, as many games as possible, and like spend time talking to the community to figure out which things should be nerfed and things like that. I think that's really, it just takes a lot of time for people to play it a lot before we can release it.
So do you think you'll be doing something like what Hearthstone did with the early closed beta? And
Yeah. Well, I think that for a multiplayer competitive game like this, the longer that you could run it in a beta format before it's out in public is only better. It's always going to be better for the game. It's always going to be better for the consumer that buys it later.
Mm-hmm. And I have to ask, the art in the game is just absolutely beautiful. But why would you go with 2D sort of pixely style instead of going 3D like is popular with games like League
Yeah.
of Legends and
Well,
Dota 2?
it's our philosophy to try something different. We really like the pixel art look. We felt that it was going to be really cool for this game because we realized that we didn't need to have a different camera angle or camera view. And so if you're going to be changing your camera all the time in terms of how you're going to view the game, then 3D will be really good because you want to see it from every angle. But from our perspective, we also want to play homage to Tactics, Fire Emblem. They're all pixel art, and they're very readable. It's very easy to understand how the game is played. So we wanted first and foremost to have readability, and we also wanted the pixel art to be very expressive. So if you start to make 3D models, it's harder to animate them, it's harder to rig them, and also you're going to be constrained by the rigs that you build. In contrast, with pixel art, we can make a big monster, we can make a 6-legged monster, we can make a two-legged female like overnight. And so it allows us to have a huge repertoire of different types of units to build. We can customize them a lot of different ways. And can you imagine trying to build 100 plus 3D models? That's going to take forever. So imagine now we can just build out the units very, very quickly and make them look really cool and dynamic.
Yeah, I especially noticed a lot of the effects you have going on, like dynamic lighting and that sort of thing. They
Yep.
really enhance the.
The pixel art look. Yeah, we wanted to complement and kind of in some ways play homage to the lo-fi pixel art, but then add a lot of really cool 3D shader touches to modernize the look and give you a feeling that, wow, this looks different. It's pixel art, but they have real-time shadows. This is kind of cool.
Just to round us off here, Kickstarter, you've had like some experience with it, I guess. You have about 11 or 12 days left. How has your experience been overall?
The experience has been amazing for us because this is the first Kickstarter that we've had, and we were really fortunate to have hit our funding very early on. I think that a lot of people, it's just very hard for Kickstarter creators to evaluate exactly at what funding goal they want to hit it at, and so we were really fortunate. And most of all, though, we were just amazed by the number of backers and the people that really wanted to dig into the game. So it's helped us a lot because we get bombarded with quite a lot of questions, and it's really helps us a lot to not be in a black hole, but to be able to think about the questions that they're asking and to be able to answer them. And it makes our game better for sure because we're getting a lot more early feedback. And the Kickstarter is extremely motivating because I think for developers, the hardest thing to deal with is working on a game for many months, many years, and sometimes no one's seen it yet. And then you just build up more and more trepidation around it because you're so scared because you spent so many hours of your life to build something and no one's seen it. So the good thing about the Kickstarter is that we were able to push out and show people what we're working on and to get their feedback and their thoughts around it. And now that people do want the game, it's extremely motivating because you have your first set of people that actually would buy it. And you're like, damn, I want to make this game now. Like, it's going to be super awesome. So that's our perspective.
All right. And can you just tell us about your Dogecoin game funding website?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things that we want to do was to find ways for other people to pledge alternate sort of ways because not everyone has PayPal or Kickstarter, and also people have a surplus of Dogecoin. And so we said, wow, why don't we just build like a cool little widget so that people can pledge their Dogecoin directly to games. And so we tried it out, and it's called duelyst.dogestarter.co. And if you go to dogestarter.co, basically that's a widget that other developers that we're making freely available to other developers to use so that other people can pledge Dogecoins to their games. So we're really excited about that. And it was something that we were doing because one of our rewards was actually a Shiba Inu Doge as an alternate skin in our game. And so those are the things that we like to do. And we're a huge fan of that stuff.
All right, Keith, thank you very much for the interview.
Thanks, Anuj. Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, and to my viewers, I'd just like to say there will be a link to the Kickstarter page and the Greenlight page and the website for Duelyst in the video description. Be sure to check it out if you thought it was interesting. I certainly think it's interesting. And thank you very much for watching. And if you enjoyed the interview, like, subscribe. If you didn't, leave a dislike or leave a comment. I'll see you next time.